This evening we're going to speak mainly in English because most of the speakers are going to be speaking in English, with the exception of Mr. Sávva Pαυλίδη. I'd like to welcome you all here tonight. It's been 42 years since the invasion and occupation of Cyprus. Every year we celebrate well, we don't celebrate, but we acknowledge that the Cyprus Week is a very important week for us. And the events of this week have to be fully attended by everyone in the community. And that's why we always like to see a full house wherever we go to. This evening has always been dedicated to one person, and that person is the first coordinator of Lobby for Cyprus, the person who actually started Lobby for Cyprus right at the beginning, during the stages of the CBMs, the confidence building measures. And that person is Kyriakos Christodoulou. And we dedicated this lecture to Kyriakos every year. This seminar here tonight is an important one because we are focusing on the human aspects of Cyprus and the experiences of those who have gone through it, and those who grew up not going through the experiences that most of us did in '74, but have returned and seen what has happened to our beloved country. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of several people here tonight, and in particular from the Cyprus High Commission, the Consul General, Mr. Ioannis Koukolaridis, welcome to this evening. Presidents of refugee associations, we have with us from Eptagomi, Mr. Nick Yanoulou, and from Lapήθου Καραβά, we have Mr. Sávva Pαυλίδη, and Mr. Angelos Pechonges was going to be here with us tonight. He apologizes. We have from some political parties as well, from EDEC, Theo, good evening. And we also have from the district of Morfu organization, and have I left anybody else out from any other organizations? We have from Kyriakos.
What about those two up there?
Yes, Kyriakos Patihis, Lefkonigon. I didn't see you gentlemen over there. Yes, Famagusta Association, Andreas and Kostas. Welcome this evening. I'm going to pass on to Theodora Χρήστου, who's going to chair this evening, and I hope you all have an enjoyable experience of our young generation who are going to give their views and their speeches tonight. Thank you.
Good evening. Actually, what we're going to start with first is Nikos Sαββίδης, who's going to open up the evening with a song. You ready?
Good evening, everybody. Just another year, same old people, less and less at the time, I have to say, I'm afraid. I'm not going to discuss the reasons, but there you go. This song is called Flag of Hope, or Song of Hope. And I would like to dedicate it to David Figulu, who actually asked me last year to write the song. It's in English. It's for all the people who still fly the flag of our independence, in brackets, of our republic, the Cyprus flag, for all those people who still fight for justice. Standing here with you, together we can do what sometimes is true. No one seemed to do. Standing here is true, together me and you. So we wasted triple years, we thought to make it through. Along with you, together we are two. The time we wasted through the years cannot be so good. the flag of home. Give your hand your own. Sing a song together, together me and you. Fly the flag of home. Give your hand your own. Sing a song together now, together me and you. Standing here with you, together we can do what for so long times true no one seemed to do. Living here with you, we are the living proof. The pain we had to go through, we are no more the fool. Fly the flag of hope. Give your hand your own. Sing a song together now, together me and you. Fly the flag of hope. Give your hand your own. Sing a song together now, together me and you. Of all the dangers you had to go through, there's nothing left for us to do but come together soon. Fly the flag of hope. Give your hand your own. Sing a song together now, together me and you. Fly the flag of hope. Give your hand your own. Sing a song together now, together me and you. Sing a song together now, together me and you. Carol, last year, especially from Trafalgar Square.
Thank you, Nick. So, as Theo said, tonight's seminar is all about refugee voices. And it's the refugee voices which puts everything into perspective. It's these voices and the voices of other victims of Turkey whose voices the government should have in their mind when they're negotiating. We're not just objects. We can't just be exchanged, and our rights can't just be conceded based on arbitrary numbers. There's a reason why treaties exist, and they set standards. They set standards whether they're international law or human rights, and they're there to guide governments. They're there to control their executive use. Because at the end of the day, we're all human beings. We have each our own beating heart, our own memories, our own dreams, and our own individual rights. And so tonight what we're going to hear is the individual stories that make up what is the Cyprus issue. So to start with, I'd like to invite Liza Matsango, who is from Ayos Ambrosios.
In April 2003, my mum, my aunt and me were in Cyprus to celebrate Easter with my grandparents. I was 17 at the time. I remember being in the kitchen while the news was on, as it always is at my grandparents' house. In a special announcement, it was revealed that the Turkish authorities had eased restrictions of the so-called border between the Republic of Cyprus and the militarily occupied north. They had done so that very morning, and I happened to be there. I remember the shock, the panic, the hysteria. This was huge. It was the first time my family would see their village, Ayos Ambrosios, in 3 decades. Ayos Ambrosios is a place that I had heard so much about growing up. It was a part of my life too, strange considering I was never allowed to visit before that day. And so we went. Then and there we got in the car and set off for Lefkosia, excited, anxious, angry. We queued in the car for 6 hours. We were obviously not the only ones with the immediate urge to visit our homes. We could not get through on that first day, so we tried again the next. But again, there were queues of cars for miles and miles. Despite not wanting to pay for a taxi in the occupied area, so desperate was everyone to go that we abandoned the car on the side of the road and we went across by foot. We had to show our passports, something that galled us all. Once through, we got a taxi to Aios Ambrosios, or Centope, as the village had been named by the area's occupiers, a standard practice in colonization as seen throughout history. We travelled through the mountains of Pentadactylos and stopped. Even though I had never been before, it was a view that I was very, very familiar with. Looking down, I saw a village with but 1,000 houses in a concentrated circular formation, surrounded by dense, dark green forests that ended abruptly with the blue of the Mediterranean Sea. It was as beautiful as everyone had always told me it was, but also so different in reality than it had appeared in old photographs. Walking through the village, the dissimilarity between maintained homes and their crumbling counterparts was so peculiar. My mum and grandparents named the houses that they recognised, fearing the state of their own mounted with each narrow street we navigated. Along the way, they commented on the litter that was thrown everywhere, another strange sight for a village that they always knew to be spotless. Then we reached the houses. My grandfather, being a builder by trade, had built his house literally with his own 2 hands, with the help only of my grandmother. When my aunt was due to marry, he did the same for her, building a house for her and my uncle next door. The difference between the two was again shocking. Surrounding my grandparents' house were piles of rubbish, piles taller than ourselves, in fact. My aunt's house, on the other hand, was clearly well maintained and clean. It had even had an extension, we were later told. My grandparents knocked on their front door, which was an unpleasant experience in itself. To ask permission to enter one's home is enraging. As expected by the condition of the house, it was Ebiki who opened. Nomadic people brought over from Turkey to distort the population ratio in Cyprus and as a mechanism for ethnic cleansing. It appeared that they did not understand Greek or English. Either way, they were not letting us in. My grandmother peered inside as the door was opened. All her furniture was still there and used by the occupants. Chairs, the sink, she even caught a glimpse of her bed. Not being allowed in was very hard for them. They had gone through a lot to build that house. It meant so much to them, and they were denied entry by the very people illegally squatting in it. We moved on to my aunt's house, where a Turkish Cypriot couple answered the door. They spoke very good English. They were teachers in Gerinja, I remember them saying. We sat down and they offered us tea. In Greek, my grandmother whispered to me that she spotted something on the mantelpiece that her grandmother had passed on to her and she in turn had given to my aunt. It was a randistiri, an ornate vase used to sprinkle holy water in the Christian Orthodox faith. I asked the couple in English what they found in the house when they arrived, explaining that it would mean a great deal if there was anything. They said there was nothing, that the house was completely empty. It was a bald-faced lie. After walking out of the house, slightly shocked, we went to the village church, which had been converted into a mosque. We walked around the outside of it as my mum told stories of meeting up with her friends there and the Easter celebrations that took place. It was bittersweet. As we drove away from Aios Ambrosios, I remember looking out to the sea and spotting a rock with a Turkish flag on it. My mum said that they used to swim out to that rock, which they had nicknamed Gatsoshiros, hedgehog in Cypriot. I became very angry at that point. There was a Turkish flag on everything, everywhere you turned, on practically every building, even on a rock in the ocean. placed, it would seem, to purposefully antagonize and infuriate, and it did. We left that day with heavy hearts. As we walked over to the free side of Cyprus, my grandmother could not contain her frustration and emotions. She began shouting that she would not leave until she spoke to a reporter. And she did. She appeared on the news that night, speaking of the pain deep inside her, the pain she felt after seeing her home and the village that she so loved, and then having to walk away, of requesting access to her own property and being denied, of stepping back to relive memories full of anguish and suffering. My grandparents have since been back to Aios Ambrosios several times. Although it hurts them greatly every time, they cannot help themselves but return. That's all they have ever wanted. Thank you.
That just goes to show that you don't need to have been born or grown up in the occupied areas to feel that it is your home, despite what other people would have us believe. And that was a very graphic description of what it feels like to return as a visitor to your own lands. Thank you. The next speaker will be Sávva Pαυλίδη from Λαπήθου Καραβά's Association.
Εγώ θα μιλήσω ελληνικά. Ελπίζω να με καταλάβετε. Ήμουν 28 χρονών όταν έγινε το πραξικόπημα και η εισβολή και για μένα το πραξικόπημα και η εισβολή είναι ένα και το αυτό έγκλημα. Προπομπός της εισβολής ήταν το πραξικόπημα. Αυτό πρέπει να το γράψουμε μέσα μας και το θυμόμαστε, γιατί σήμερα πάνε να αλλάξουν οι καταστάσεις. Ήμουν νιόπαντρος, είχα ένα γιο 20 μηνών περίπου και ήρθε και μας βρήκε το κακό. Τις τελευταίες 4 δεκαετίες, κάθε Ιούλιο και Αύγουστο, προσωπικά αισθάνομαι πάρα πολύ παράξενα, ασυνήθιστα παράξενα. Και φαντάζομαι την εθνική μνήμη, αν και πολύ σοβαρά λαβωμένη, να στέκεται έτσι πεισματικά όρθια πάνω στη ματωμένη από τα τραγικά γεγονότα εξέδρα της πρόσφατης ιστορίας της μαρτυρικής μας Κύπρου και να δέχεται βουβή και συνοφριωμένη, συγκλονισμένη και απογοητευμένη από τη δυσχερή πορεία των μέχρι σήμερα εξελίξεων γύρω από το εθνικό μας θέμα, τον βαθύτατα πέρθυμο χαιρετισμό των αγνοουμένων, των αδικοχαμένων αδερφών μας και των χιλιάδων των προσφύγων που διασκορπιστήκαν σαν τα πρόβατα ανά την Ιφίλιο. Εδώ και 42 χρόνια υποφέρουμε σαν πρόσφυγες κάτω από την πότα του Τούρκου Αττήλα, μακριά από τις πόλεις, τα χωριά μας, τα σπίτια μας, τις περιουσίες μας. Προσωπικά δεν άντεξα και δεν μπόρεσα να πάω πίσω στο χωριό μου μετά το 1974. Δεν έχω προσωπικές εμπειρίες να σας διηγηθώ, επομένως, επισκεπτόμενος ξανά τον τόπο που γεννήθηκα, μεγάλωσα, παντρεύτηκα. Πήγαν όμως τα αδέρφια μου. Και πρέπει να σας πω ότι η αδερφή μου, 1 χρόνο μικρότερη μου, αλλά είχε παντρευτεί 1 χρόνο νωρίτερα από μένα, και ο γαμπρός μου, γυρνώντας πίσω στη Λεμεσό, που είναι μέχρι σήμερα πρόσφυγες, έπαθε κατάθλιψη. Της τηλεφώνησα από το Λονδίνο να δω τι είχε να μου πει και έκλαιγε απαρηγόρητα. Μου λέει 1000 φορές καλύτερα να μην πήγαινα, να είχα κρατήσει την εικόνα της ομορφιάς του τόπου μας ζωντανή μέσα μου, έτσι όπως την αφήσα. Τα ίδια μου είπαν και οι άλλες οι αδερφές μου και ο μικρότερος αδερφός μου, που σήμερα δεν είναι μικρός φυσικά, που ήταν 11 χρόνων όταν φύγαμε. Οι γονείς μου περίμενα προσωπικά ότι με ανέμεναν να πάω στην Κύπρο το καλοκαίρι για να μου πούν να τους συνοδεύσω στα κατεχόμενα. Το άφησα να μου το ζητήσουν οι ίδιοι, δεν μου το ζήτησαν ποτέ και πριν φύγω λίγες μέρες του λέω στον πατέρα μου, μα δεν θέλεις να πας να δεις τους κόπους σου. Ο πατέρας μου ήταν χρυσοχώος στο επάγγελμα, αυτοεργοδοτούμενος, είχε υπαλλήλους, αλλά επένδυσε τα πάντα στο χωριό. Έκανε μια τεράστια περιουσία, την καλύτερη ίσως του χωριού, και το όνειρό του ήταν να χτίσουμε όλα τα παιδιά του μέσα στο κτήμα το μεγάλο, στις πηγές, για να συγκεντρωθεί η οικογένεια εκεί. Και παρόλο όταν εγώ είχα αραβωνιαστεί, η γυναίκα μου είχε ήδη έτοιμο σπίτι, είπε: δικό σας και εκείνο, αλλά εδώ θα χτίσουμε όλοι κάτω. Και αυτόν κάναμε. Χτίσαμε 3 σπίτια. Η πληγή του από τον χαμόν του τόπου μας ήταν πραγματικά βαθιά. Και όταν τον ρώτησα, θέλεις να πάμε να δούμε, μου λέει, θυμάσαι, μου λέει, έπαθα καρδιακό επεισόδιο μόλις φύγαμε. Επέζησα. Δεν θέλω να πάω πίσω και να ξαναπάθω καρδιακό και να μείνω επί τόπου. Αν θα πάω πίσω, θα πάω για να μείνω για πάντα. Διαφορετικά δεν πάω. Αυτό είχε μπει και στον Τουρκοκύπριο, που κατοικεί ακόμα στο σπίτι μας, εκεί το πατρογονικό, όταν τον επισκέφτηκε στο μαγαζί του στη Λευκοσία, γιατί επαναδραστηριοποιήθηκε μετά και έκανε δικές του δουλειές ξανά, μαζί με τη μητέρα μου. Όταν τον επισκέφτηκε ο Τούρκος στο μαγαζί, ο οποίος είχε γνωρίσει τον μικρό μου αδερφό που είναι δημοσιογράφος και ο οποίος τον βοήθησε να βγάλει και ταυτότητα κυπριακή, του πρότεινε στον πατέρα μου να πάνε πίσω. Και εκείνος επανέλαβε αυτά που σας έχω πει πιο πάνω. Για μένα, αναπολώντας όλα αυτά τα χρόνια, είναι σημαντικό να βρούμε τους λόγους για τους οποίους έγινε το κακό. Και οι λόγοι, δυστυχώς και πάλι, για τη φίλη μας, έγκυνται στη διχόνοια, στο φανατισμό και στο αναντίλεκτο γεγονός ότι σαν ροκί δεν βάζουμε ποτέ μυαλό. Ανακυκλώνουμε τις ίδιες καταστάσεις και στο τέλος την πληρώνουμε ακριβά. Θέλω να πω ότι εκείνο που περίμενα προσωπικά, ύστερα από αυτήν όλη την καταστροφή, είναι τουλάχιστον όσοι ευθύνονταν για τα γεγονότα να απολογηθούν, να κάνουν αυτοκριτική, να ζητήσουν ένα συγγνώμη και να αντιληφθούν ότι έστω και παρασυρμένοι ίσως, έσφαλαν. Υπάρχει μια μερίδα ανθρώπων που το κατάλαβαν, ελάχιστη. Η πλειοψηφία όμως, όχι μόνο δεν το κατάλαβε, αλλά συνεχίζει να συμπεριφέρεται ως εάν να μην έχει γίνει τίποτα και ως εάν να κυλούν όλα όμαλα. Σε μερικές περιπτώσεις, μάλιστα, κάποιοι από αυτούς προβάλλονται και ως εθνοσωτήρες, χωρίς να ερυθριούν. Φυσικά, η ατιμωρησία πρώτα-πρώτα των προτετείων της καταστροφής και στη συνέχεια όλων των υπολείπων είναι ο κύριος λόγος για τον οποίο κάποιοι ακούνε αποθρασινθεί. Από την άλλη, λέγοντας αυτά και διατηρώντας τη μνήμη μας άσβηστες όλες εκείνες τις ταλαιπωρίες που υποστήκαμε, και θα αναφερθώ μόνο σε μια-δυο αν έχω λίγα λεπτά μετά. Αναβαλώντας λοιπόν αυτά όλα, δεν θέλουμε να αναμοχλεύσουμε πάθη και μίση και έχθρες και εκδικήσεις. Κάθε άλλο. Θέλουμε ειρηνικά να ασχοληθούμε με το πρόβλημα μας σοβαρά, να προσπαθήσουμε όλοι μαζί να βρούμε μια λύση και να μπορέσουμε να εξασφαλίσουμε τις προϋποθέσεις της επιστροφής μας στον τόπο που μας γέννησε, στον τόπο που μας ανήκει, στη γη των πατεράδων μας. Δεν έχουμε καμιά σκοπιμότητα στο να κατηγορήσουμε άλλους, άλλωστε και εμείς που λέμε ότι δεν φταίξαμε πολύ, έχουμε κάποιες ευθύνες. Και η ανοχή είναι κακό πράγμα και το γεγονός ότι και η επίσημη κυβέρνηση μας στάθηκε χλιαρά έναντι αυτής της κατάστασης έχει ευθύνες. Όφιλε η κυβέρνηση να υπερασπίσει τους νομιμόφρονες πολίτες της, τους δημοκρατικούς, την τεράστια πλειοψηφία του κυπριακού πληθυσμού και στις δύο κοινότητες. Δυστυχώς, προσωπικά πιστεύω ότι ουδέποτε ίσως στην ιστορία της Κύπρου μια τόσο ελάχιστη, μηδαμινή, αμεληταία ποσόστοση πληθυσμού έκαμε έναν τόσο μεγάλο κακό στην τεράστια πλειοψηφία των συμπολιτών της. Και αυτό πρέπει να το θυμόμαστε. Καμιά φορά νομίζουμε τι θα κάνουμε, άστα να πάει παρατήρητο κλπ. Και όμως η ανοχή δίνει περιθώρια να θεργέψουν καταστάσεις και να επικρατήσουν. Είπα στην αρχή ότι για μένα πραξικόπημα και εισβολή είναι το ίδιο πράγμα, το ίδιο έγκλημα. Να πω μια εμπειρία. Όποιος δεν ήταν είτε με τη μια παράταξη τότε που έγινε ο διχασμός, είτε με την άλλη, ήταν εχθρός και των δύο. Δεν είσαι μαζί μου, άρα είσαι εναντίον μου. Εμείς που δεν είμαστε ούτε αναμειγμένοι σε ομάδες όπως ιδρύθηκαν τότε εκτός κρατικής οντότητας κάποιες μονάδες αυτόβουλα για να υπερασπιστούν τάχατε στη δημοκρατία και την υπερασπίστηκαν δυναμικά μερικές φορές. Και οι άλλοι που ήθελαν να καταλύσουν τη δημοκρατία για να φέρουν την ένωση, της Κύπρου με την Τουρκία μάλλον πάει να γίνει παρά με την Ελλάδα, ήμασταν εχθροί και των δύο. Προσωπικά η εμπειρία μου τώρα. Είχα την εμπειρία να μου προτείνουν να αναλάβω την αρχηγία της ΕΟΚΑΒΙΤΑ στην περιοχή μας. Γιατί ήμουν έφεδρος αξιωματικός, ήμουν εκπαιδευτικός και νόμιζαν ότι θα αποδεχόμουν με καμάρι. Όταν συζήτησα το θέμα με τον Πρώτα, ήταν υπέδειξα ότι δεν πάμε να κάνουμε ένα αγώνα για ένωση, πάμε να κάνουμε ένα αδερφοκτόνο διαμάχη. Δεν με άκουσε, πρότεινε κάποιον άλλον χωριανό, ανάλαβε εκείνος. Έζησα τα γεγονότα από κοντά, γιατί ο παπάς μας, για παράδειγμα, ανερθρίαστα, με περίμενε, λέει, να με ορκίσει μέλος της ΕΟΚΑΒΙΤΑ μέσα στην εκκλησία. Δίπλα ήταν ο σύλλογος. Και φανερά όρκιζε συνέχεια. Και επειδή εγώ δεν έμεινα στην εκκλησία, δεν έφυγα, εκείνοι πήγαν και έκαναν κατακόμπιν το σύλλογο. 50 μέτρα τώρα μακριά, για να καταλάβετε την κατάντια μας. Η μια είσοδος της εκκλησίας, η άλλη του συλλόγου. Κλπ. Όμως, ήρθε και η ώρα που επικράτησε το πραξικόπημα, πρέπει να το πω, με πήραν για να με εκτελέσουν, ξέροντας ότι δεν ήμουν αναμειγμένος. Και με γλίτωσε την τελευταία στιγμή ένας δικός τους άνθρωπος της ΕΟΚΑΒΙΤΑ, ο οποίος ήταν χωριανός και ήξερε τα προηγούμενα, πιστεύω μου, και τη δράση μου. Φεύγω όμως από το πραξικόπημα για να πάω στην εισβολή. Όταν ήρθε η μέρα της εισβολής και είδαμε τα αεροπλάνα να βομβαρδίζουν και να σκοτώνουν τους στρατιώτες μας στον Κοντεμένο, το σπίτι μου φαινόταν καθαρά ο δρόμος προς τον Κοντεμένο και η διάβαση. Εγώ έπαθα σοκ, τρελάθηκα, άρπαξα το αυτοκίνητο, πήγα στο σύλλογο που ήταν το άντρον τότε της ΕΟΚΑΒΙΤΑ, τους είπα ρε παιδιά ότι έγινε, ήρθαν οι Τούρκοι, πάμε να δούμε τι κάνουμε να σώσουμε τον τόπο μας. 2 λεπτά. Αυτό θα πω. Και το αποτέλεσμα, ο αρχηγός εκεί, που ήταν και καταζητούμενος τάχατε της ΕΟΚΑΒΙΤΑ και παυμένος αστυνομικός, είπε εγώ έχει τόσες ημέρες που είμαι εδώ, ό,τι έκαμα, ο σώζον εαυτός σωθείδο και έφυγε και πήγε στην Πάφο. Κάποιοι άλλοι από εμάς ετοιμαστήκαμε και πήγαμε στο 5 μίλι. Έζησα τα γεγονότα στο 5 μίλι, επολέμησα με πολλά μέτωπα, δεν είναι του παρόντος, όμως μένει μέσα μου ακόμα χαραγμένη η σκηνή, αρκετές σκηνές που μεταφέραμε νεκρούς συναγωνιστές μας. Ο Μακαρίδη τον Κώστα τον Πίτσα, το Σκουφάρι και άλλους. Αναφέρω τους δύο τούτους γιατί ο ένας πέθανε στα χέρια μου παίρνοντας το νύχτα από τον Πενταδάκτυλο στην κλινική των αδερφών Καραβά στην Μόρφου. Όσοι είστε από τη Μόρφου. Το Σκουφάρι που ο υπολοχαγός του τον γύρω και τον έχασε και νόμισε ότι τραπέδευσε ή έφυγε κάπου και μου είπε αν το βρεις βάρ' να μείνει μαζί σας, ο οποίος βρέθηκε με το χάραμα του φωτός πάνω σε ένα βράχο κολλημένος. Είναι φρικιαστικές οι εικόνες, δεν θέλω να επεκταθώ. Και κάθε χρόνο, όπως σας είπα στην αρχή και τελειώνω, αυτήν την περίοδο αναλογίζομαι όλα αυτά τα γεγονότα, με συγκλονίζουν και θέλω να πιστεύω ότι παρά τις αντιξότητες, παρά τα προβλήματα που έχουμε μπροστά μας, δεν μπορεί. Πρέπει κάποτε να βρεθεί μια λύση. Μια παραδεκτή λύση, τέλος πάντων, που να επιτρέψει στον λαό της Κύπρου, στο σύνολο του, να ζήσει ειρηνικά, να χαρεί επιτέλους μια ζωή δημιουργική. Η δική μου γενιά, και πολλούς από εσάς οι γενιές, δεν έχει ζήσει ειρηνικά. Τολμώ να πω ότι η ειρηνική ζωή εγώ γνώριζα από τότε που ήρθα στην Αγγλία. γεννηθήκαμε με το 55-59, το 63, μάχες της Κοφίνου εν ενεργεία θυμολογαγός τότε, πήραν μέρος, μάχες του Πενταδάκτυλου το 64, ξέρετε, ο μαθητής γυμνασίου πάλι εκεί, μυστικές ομάδες πριν να γίνει η Εθνική Φρουρά, να ετοιμαζόμαστε κλπ. Και γέμισε η ζωή μας με τούτον το άκρος out, ας πούμε, γεγονός ότι ζεις για να έχεις τούτες τις ταλαιπωρίες. Λοιπόν, η ζωή δεν είναι μόνο πόλεμος και κατάρα ο πόλεμος, όσοι τον ζήσαν θα συμφωνούν μαζί μου και πρέπει να αποφεύγεται πάση θυσία και εύχομαι ακριβώς να βρεθεί μια λύση και να ζήσει ειρηνικά ο κόσμος, όμως με εξασφαλισμένα τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα. Εγώ δεν λέω τίποτε παραπάνω. Ευχαρίστως θα πάω και στο Γκερίνια, ακόμα και κάτω από τουρκική διοίκηση, αν ξέρω ότι θα πάω με ασφάλεια, αν θα ζήσω σαν έντιμος πολίτης, θα ασκώ τα δικαιώματα μου του εκλέγεστε και όλα τα ανθρώπινα δικαιώματα μου θα γίνονται σεβαστά και τότε θα υπάρξει προοπτική λύση. Αν δεν εξασφαλιστούν όλα αυτά, δεν πρόκειται να υπάρξει. Και τελειώνοντας, θέλω να πω ότι αν βρίσκομαι εγώ, όπως και χιλιάδες άλλοι συμπατριώτες μας, στο Λονδίνο σήμερα, και αν πέρασα και 10 χρόνια στις Αραπικές και αν, δεν το επέλεξα. Μου το επέβαλε η τουρκική εισβολή. Φύγαμε από τα σπίτια μας διωγμένοι με τη βία και γι' αυτό να απαιτούμε από την Κυπριακή Πολιτεία και την κυβέρνηση να μας αναγνωρίσει το δικαίωμα να θεωρούμαστε ισότιμοι πολίτες της Κυπριακής Δημοκρατίας, άσχετα αν ζούμε στη Λευκοσία, στη Λεμεσό, στην Πάφο, στο Λονδίνο ή στον Καναδά. Αυτό είναι το δίκαιο αίτημα που νιώθουμε ότι πλημμυρίζει μέσα μας, διότι ένα δημοψήφισμα μελλοντικό για να βρεθεί κάποια λύση στο Κυπριακό θα επηρεάσει πρωτίστως και τη δική μας ζωή. Και όπως το πραξικόπημα και η εισβολή άλλαξε τα πάντα στο ρουν του προγραμματισμού της ζωής μας, ούτε φανταστήκαμε ποτέ αυτά που μας συνέβησαν στο μέλλον που περάσαμε, έτσι θα αλλάξει το ρουν της ιστορίας και για τις επερχόμενες γενιές. Και πρέπει να εξασφαλιστεί μια ειρηνική, βιώσιμη λύση. Ευχαριστώ πολύ.
If you will allow me, I'll just quickly summarize in English for those of you who didn't understand what was said in Greek. So unlike Liza, Gira Pavlidhi grew up in Cyprus and has first-hand experience of the conflict, having fought in almost all of the conflicts that engulfed Cyprus during that period, and was clearly still moved and emotional about that experience. He is a refugee who is yet to find the heart to return to his village. He has, however, had family members who went back, but each and every one of them regretted returning and wished that they had not gone back and that they had kept in their minds the beautiful memories of pre-74 villages. He had once, after the checkpoints had opened, returned, and he was waiting for his parents to ask him to take them over. And they didn't, so he asked his dad, do you not want to go? Do you not want me to take you? And his dad said, no, I suffered a heart attack the first time I was made to leave. I don't want to risk suffering a second heart attack. I will only return when I get to stay there forever. He then went on to say that by this time he had expected that those responsible should have at least stepped forward to, at the very least, apologize for the wrongs that they committed that led to the continuing occupation, and that responsibility is not about stirring up hatred, it's about understanding why things happened and about moving forward in the hope that Cyprus will one day find a peaceful existence. He's then finally said that he's happy to return under any circumstances as long as he is secure and that his human rights are respected, and reminded us that most of the refugees in the diaspora are not in the diaspora and away from Cyprus out of choice, but by force. And he demands from the government that they be treated the same as any other Cypriot citizen, whether living in Nicosia or Paphos, and especially when it comes to a referendum which will permanently decide the future of Cyprus. So the third speaker will be from the district organisation of Modful.
Just a little bit about Modful for those of you who don't know. where it is. It's located in the northwest part of Cyprus and was first inhabited by the Spartans. It is one of the richest and fertile areas of Cyprus, and the valley of Morpho was developed quickly due to its fertility and abundance of underground waters. Because of this, the inhabitants planted vegetables and grains. Ultimately, they cultivated citrus fruit, especially oranges and grapefruit, and 51% of the Cyprus citrus fruit was grown during 1974 in Morpho and the surrounding villages. Before the Turkish invasion, Morpho had a population of about 12,000 people, and a handful of these were Turkish Cypriot families. There were 2 co-educational high schools, an economic school and an agricultural school. A teachers' college existed until 1959 and was the predecessor of the modern-day Teachers' Academy. There were also many important intellectual institutions and athletic organisations, a basketball team and 2 football teams. So it's quite a big, a lot happened in Morpho. As an only child, I grew up and was educated in London during the 1950s and 60s and spent a lot of my summer holidays in Cyprus. I longed to return to Morpho and live there along with my many cousins, aunts and uncles. My parents had a house built for me in Morpho in 1968, working and saving hard to achieve this over the 15 years that they lived in London. They sent my grandfather money to plant citrus trees on some of their land so that they could have an income from the sale of the fruit once they were retired. My parents' next goal was to work for a few more years and build a house for themselves in Morpho so that they too could return and live there once I had moved back and settled. In 1969 I moved out to Cyprus, but my parents remained in London, planning to move out to Cyprus in the near future. I met my husband, married and had my daughter in 1972 and lived a wonderful carefree life until the dreadful summer of 1974, when my life and the lives of the Cypriot people were shattered, firstly with the coup and the attempted assassination of President Makarios, and then with the Turkish invasion. My husband, along with all the young men of Cyprus, was mobilised, and I was left to look after my 2-year-old daughter. I did not know where he was stationed or what had become of him once the fighting had started. The Turkish army had landed on the Kyrenia coast not many miles from Morpho. It seemed far away, as though it was in another country, as we had not seen or heard any of the fighting, just what we heard on the radio or saw on the TV. But then the planes came, dropping their bombs. We would run and hide under the stairs, as we were told that was the safest place. My grandparents, my daughter and I crouched under the stairs until the planes had finished their bombardment. Every time we heard a plane, we would run and hide. For many years after, the sound of a plane overhead made me very nervous. Soon, people fleeing from the Kyrenia area began to arrive in Morpho, and word spread of what they had witnessed. We heard that civilians had been killed and women raped. People were anxious for their daughters and their children, and newborn babies were hastily baptized. The refugees from Kyrenia needed clothes, bedding and food, and we gave them whatever we could. We were in a good position, we were still in our homes. I had never realised how fortunate we were until we became refugees ourselves. During the brief ceasefire, my husband came home and told me that he wanted me out of Cyprus, away from the danger, and bought me and my daughter a ticket back to London. Many Brits were being airlifted out by the British bases, but although I had a British passport, I did not come out that way. So I packed a suitcase with some clothes for me and my daughter, locked the house and left. I boarded the last ship out of Famagusta to Piraeus and then caught a flight from Athens back to London, back to the safety of the UK and my parents' house. A few hours out of Famagusta, while we were sleeping in our cabin, we hit very stormy seas, unusual for that time of year, and I managed to make my way up to the deck with my daughter in my arms up into the fresh air. The ship was being thrown about by huge waves, and I was beginning to feel seasick and worried that I would not be able to care for my daughter. While sitting on the deck, I heard the bombers again coming in for their second attack after negotiations had broken down and the ceasefire had ended, this time with Famagusta and Morpho in their sights. The planes were so low, I could see the pilots, and I thought that any minute now we would be bombed. But they flew past us and made their way to Cyprus to finish off what they had started. I sat in a chair with a 2-year-old on my lap for 2 days until we got to Piraeus, with people all around us crying and being ill, including myself and my daughter, not knowing what was happening in Cyprus, whether our loved ones were dead or alive. I arrived in London, and the first thing I saw on TV on the news was the Turkish army just walking into Mosul, facing no resistance at all. Thankfully, all my family had escaped into the mountains, sleeping wherever they could, in barns, tents, under trees and in cars. Once the fighting had ended, my husband was demobilised and remained in Cyprus as he was working in local government. In the meantime, I was living in London with my parents, and as we had no home to go back to, my husband joined us, taking a few months' leave from work in the hope that we would return to our home soon. 42 years later, and we're still here. When the border was opened, we didn't want to go. Why should we show passports to go to our own town? And why should we knock on our own front door and ask to be allowed in? My cousins would try their best to persuade us, but we refused. It was not until 3 years later that we gave in and crossed over so that we could see for ourselves and eventually take my daughter to see her birthplace. My mother had gone in the first few months of opening, and she visited my house and saw the people who occupied it. They told her that if we wanted to go to see the house, then we should telephone them first so that they could be prepared. We did that. A few days later, my cousin drove us via Kyrenia. We drove across the Bendadaktylos Mountains and into Kyrenia, stopping by the harbour. In case we forgot that it was under occupation, there was not a single building or boat that was not flying the red flag. Groups of young men loitering, looking suspiciously at us. They were Turkish soldiers in plain clothes, we were later told. It felt as if we were in another country. I felt no joy, but fear and oppression. I felt as if I couldn't breathe. We then drove along the coast with the beautiful views of the coastline. There were half-built houses, ruined houses and beautiful villas. Everywhere was the red flag as a reminder. We drove through Gabodi, where a new university has been built, and onto the road leading into Morpho, past our orchards that my grandfather lovingly created for us. New houses had been built along the road, and there was a large dirty shanty town that had been erected, probably by Turkish settlers. We drove into the town through empty streets towards my house. Why did the roads and the houses seem so small? There was no life. Where was everybody? My house was in view. I could see rusty railings, peeling paint and crumbling plaster on the walls, window shutters hanging off and in need of painting. The beautiful orchard across the street was no more. Instead, it was a dumping ground for old tractors, rubbish and stray dogs. The trees had died long ago. Where were the 3 old ladies that sat in the shade and gossiped about everyone and anyone? Where were the women laughing and joking with each other from their windows, cleaning until everything shone, the smell of their cooking wafting through the house and into the air? And once their work was done, sitting on each other's verandas, having their afternoon coffee and cake, showing off their latest embroideries and discussing their best recipes while their children laughed and played. My tenant opened the door and showed us into my house. We were offered coffee and a ligo, and then asked if we wanted to go around the house and see it. They were very nice people, actually. The rooms were the same. Even the paint on the walls was the same colour, but none of my furniture, except for a corner unit in the study that they couldn't remove, and the lampshade in the hallway. The kitchen and bathrooms had not changed at all. The family were the second to occupy the house, so they found nothing except for some old photographs and a set of encyclopedias which we were given on leaving. The family that lived there were from Paphos, and they too desperately wanted to return to their homes. They hated living there, as all their neighbours were Turkish settlers who they did not get on with. He was a teacher who actually trained at the teacher college in Mofu in the 50s, and he spoke Greek. He told us that they had nothing to do They had done nothing to the house since they moved in, as there was a possibility that Motful would be returned. We drove quickly through the empty streets towards the commercial area, which was always buzzing pre-1974, to the outskirts of the town where new buildings had been erected, hotels, casinos, bars and clubs. A car park was built over the cemetery. The bones of my ancestors weighed down by concrete and cars instead of crosses and flowers. As soon as we left Motful and crossed over the border, I felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted off me and I could breathe again. But I wanted to go back and walk through the streets, not drive through. I wanted to walk to my grandparents' house and to my aunts' and cousins' houses. I wanted to walk to the shops and to the churches, just as I did when I lived there. After the no vote, we visited Motful again, but this time the house was unrecognisable. It was newly painted, new shutters had replaced the old broken ones, and it looked clean and loved. Was this because they knew they were staying? I have been back 3 times and walked the routes that I had taken many times during the happy years. I went again with my daughter and her husband, who, seeing Motful as it has become, could not understand what it was that made me love the town so much. But she did not know the Motful I knew, the people, the family, the warmth, the laughter, the community. She will probably never get to experience what I experienced in the short time I lived in Motful. Let's hope that one day we will all return to the land of our ancestors and rebuild again. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for that account of your emotional exodus, followed by your emotional return, which highlights something interesting, because Lisa also alluded to the red flags which fly high in Turkish national pride, and at the same time, the same pride isn't shown to the villages themselves. And you described how what's missing is not only pride in the village, but also the life and soul of the village, which were the people and the energy that. But also interesting was the clash of cultures between the Turkish Cypriots and the Turkish colonists which have been imported, and that's something we continuously hear, is the fact that they just don't get on, they don't work together. And finally, the disrespect shown to the dead with the crosses shattered and everything.
Αυτό το τραγούδι λέγεται «Ρίγας Φεραίος στα 40 μας». Ήταν 2 χρονών βέβαια, τώρα είναι στα 42 μας. Πάμε.
Εσύ καλά μας τα λέγες, μα εμείς που να σκεφτούμε τα λόγια σου τα άγια, πως θα τα ξαναπούμε. Εσύ καλά μας έδειχνες, μα εμείς που να το δούμε τα λόγια σου, τα αιώνια, πως θα έρθουν να μας βρούνε. Καλύτερα μιας ώρας μας έλεγες εσύ, μα εμάς 40 χρόνια μας σκέπασε σιωπή. Μα εμάς 40 χρόνια μας σκέπασε σιωπή. Μας σκέπασε σιωπή. Πού είσαι τώρα ρίγα μου, να δεις και να δακρύσεις το γένος, την κατάτια του και ποιον να πρωτοφτύσεις. Πού είσαι τώρα ρίγα μου, να'ρθείς και να φωτίσεις σε γένος πάλι ελεύθερο, να'ρθείς να ξαναζήσεις. μας έλεγες έτσι. Μα εμάς 40 χρόνια μας σκέπασε σιωπή. Μα εμάς 40 χρόνια μας σκέπασε σιωπή. Μας σκέπασε σιωπή. Εσένα σε σκοτώσανε μες της σλαβιάς τους τείχους, μα της ψυχής σου αιώνια θα ακούμε τους τείχους. Καλύτερα μιας ώρας μας έλεγες εσύ. Μα εμάς 40 χρόνια μας σκέπασε σιωπή. Μα εμάς 40 χρόνια μας σκέπασε σιωπή. Μας σκέπασε σιωπή. Μας σκέπασε σιωπή.
Now we'll continue with 3 more refugee voices. The next one will be Helen Anastasi, a long-term member of Lobby for Cyprus and also from Ayos Amvarosios.
My name is Helen Anastasi and I'm a second generation Greek Cypriot. I was born in London to parents who had come to the UK in the 50s. Like so many other Cypriots, they left an impoverished Cyprus to find work and venture and to help their families back home. My mum is from Ayos Amvarosios, Karina, and my dad's from Panakividas, Limassol. In 1974, I was still at school. I remember the day of the invasion. That day changed the lives of my mum's family forever. From that day, words such as invasion, refugees, United Nations resolutions were part of my everyday vocabulary. From that first day of the invasion and to what we came to call the second invasion, nothing was ever the same for my family. The initial disbelief and shock very soon turned to fear for the lives of my grandmother, my aunt and uncle, and my cousins, as there was no news for about 5 days after the second invasion. Finally, a telegram arrived with 3 words, Imetha Oli Gala, we are all well, and we knew we were the lucky ones. But nobody then thought, 42 years later, that we would still be talking about illegal invasions, refugees, and human rights, etc. So, the first time I returned, in quotes, was 3 years ago, and again this year, both times with my mum and other family members. Both times it was to fulfill a longing, trying to recapture something lost, and for me to see the village I had grown to love as a child on those long summer holidays. The first stab in the heart is at the crossing. This is the invasion in its reality, the denial of free movement in your own country, another state saying, this is ours, but we are giving you permission to visit. And I can understand why there are many who will never go, who will never accede. But we swallow hard and we accept what we have to do to go to the village one more time. We drive through Nicosia, head towards Bendadaktylos mountain. I know what this mountain means to my family. I grew up hearing that Bendadaktylos means home. Just on the other side of that mountain, they would say, is the village. As we drive nearer the mountain, we see that the base is scarred with enormous craters. They are mining and destroying it. All the way towards the village, there are new houses where there were once just pine trees. We eventually get to the village and stop outside the school. My mum gets out of the car and she shouts, "This is my school," loud enough for people to come out of the offices in the school. She's crying now and a man is leading her into the school office, asking if she wants any water, a coffee, anything to stop her wailing. He is kind and he listens to her stories. He tells her he has also lost his home. He was from Bafos. She eventually comes out calmer and ready to continue. We walk slowly, my mum pointed to this house and the names of the families who owned them. The modern houses were intact and looked lived in, but the old traditional stone-built houses were derelict and in ruins. When we reached my grandmother's house, the house my mum grew up in, she went straight into the front yard and the gardens, pointing out all the changes, the missing trees here, the new outbuildings there. This was still her house and she was reclaiming it. I looked around seeing a familiar house and trying to remember where it was that me and my cousins played. It was the same house but not the same. I wanted to reconnect to my 13-year-old self, to see my grandmother and aunt going in and out of the house, watering the plants, picking vegetables in the garden and plucking a chicken for our soup later on. Instead, I was standing in an empty courtyard. The people who gave life to this house were no longer here. I walked around to see the rest of the houses in the neighbourhood. I knew the names of each family. Their doors were always open to me and my cousins. They fed us, kept an eye on us while we played, and we felt safe and loved. We walked a little longer around the village but saw no one. No one on the streets nor outside the houses. It felt like a ghost town and I wanted to leave. We drove out of the village and headed toward the orchards and the fields. This trip had a specific purpose. My mum wanted to go to every orchard and every field to show us what belonged to her and therefore what belonged to us. So this went on for what felt like hours. We stopped in the middle of fields with names such as Aya, Yerolanda, and orchards named Doxameni and Galoiros. We took endless photographs of my mum in fields pointing into the distance. There was a particular field that we know that's called Burkari, where my grandfather had built a two-room hut, long since disappeared. I was told stories about this place by my aunts and my mum. This was the place my mum and her sister would spend weeks in, during the harvest season, on their own, without their parents, from when they were very young. My mother from 13 years old and my aunt from 15 years old. They picked olives, carobs and watermelon. This was their life and the lives of so many of her generation. I am amazed at what they have achieved for themselves and how different their children's lives are. My mum said her dream when she was 14 years old was to go to England, learn to drive and own a business. Well, that 14-year-old girl did just that. Her generation and my grandparents' generation had very little and worked very hard, but they had their own homes and land to make a living from. They had dreams and aspirations for their children. Their homes and their fields meant more to them than monetary value. In a way, it defined them. It gave them their place in their society. So that's what is destroyed when someone loses their home. It's not just the four walls or the land. It's the lost community, the loss of heritage. As a second-generation Cypriot, 1974 and everything that followed taught me about injustice via my family and what they went through. It wasn't just something that I read about. It got me involved in campaigning and it taught me about politics. I've worked and made friends with like-minded people, and with them I will do all I can to campaign for a just solution for Cyprus. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And from that we can look at something that you mentioned, which hasn't been mentioned before, is the environmental damage and the harm that's done by when lawless regimes exist in a place. The denial of free movement as well, the importance of land to Cypriots, and the fact that it was more than a piece of land, it was their life. But also, more importantly, your mother shows the resilience that we as Cypriots have, and it's something that is used repeatedly against us, but it shouldn't be. The loss is still there. Thank you. The next speaker will be Nick Yanulu, hobble over, from Eptagomi.
I want to take you back to 1973. That was a year before the invasion. It's the last time I visited Eptagomi in all its glory with the Hokani, the relatives, with everyone there before they were displaced. We arrived in Eptagomi in, beginning of August, But throughout the trip, obviously, as you've all been there to your villages, you know what it's like. We come to the last day of the holiday, and as it was in those days, everyone used to come and see us off, everyone. So it seemed like the whole village had come to my grandmother's house, which was at the higher end of the village. Now, our village was on the south side of Theatro, so it was on the slope. So from my grandmother's house, you could see the whole area just at night, you could see the sea on the south side. I was only 15, and they're all there, and I went and stood at one spot, and I looked out to take in the view. And my father's sister came up to me, and then I said to her, I was just having a look. And I thought to myself, take it all in, because you're never going to see it again. Now, why would a 15-year-old think that? I don't know. Anyway, the following year, obviously, we had the invasion and we didn't see it again. So when the Green Line finally opened in 2004, I was one of the first ones to get on a flight, to go back, and I said to my mum, I want to go and see it, just in case they close that line again. So we arrived, I landed about 4 in the morning, got in the car, drove to my cousin's in Paralimni. I got him out of bed, I said, Hade, Nabami. So we drove, we got to the crossing point at Ayos Nikolaos, and we queued for 5 hours. We got through, and as I was getting closer to Tagormi, the memory of 73 was coming back to me. When we used to drive to the villages, at night time we used to drive, you used to see these twinkly lights as they come through the trees. And even daytime, when we used to drive, I used to see the spear of Ayos Gus, our main church, used to pop up from the trees. And I was looking for that as we drove from Gomikabi, the village before, and as we got closer, I saw that the top of Ayos Gus. And, I was
Emotional.
Very emotional. Anyway, we got into the village, and you see some of the pictures here of what we saw, and it wasn't like that. We didn't leave it like that. Nothing like that. So one of the first places we went into a church, we went to Yorkis, and you could see how they've treated it. But then we found the barber shop. We went to the old barbers, and surprisingly enough, he was a colonist, but he spoke Turkish. And my cousin, who did a lot of work in, sorry, not Turkish, German.
Oh, German.
My cousin, who did a lot of work in Germany, could speak German, so he spoke to him. He says, look at us. He said, why don't you look after him? Why are you treating him like this? And he turned around in German, he said to him, what for? It's not ours. When they tell us to go, we go. So that's the mentality. So we drove around and we come back. So from that point on, any opportunity I have, there was one point though, I forgot to mention, there was 2 walls there. That was what was left in my parents' house. That was in front of my grandparents. We left in 73 with a house that stood there for 400 years. And after 30 years of occupation, they left 2 walls. And the reason why they left 2 walls is the colonists used to take all the timber out, all the doors, and use it as firewood because they couldn't be bothered to go to the forest and cut proper trees. Anyway, coming back on, and whenever I get an opportunity to educate sort of British MPs or anyone on the situation in Cyprus, I always grasp that opportunity. I was the first person to take David Burrows, who's the MP for Enfield Southgate, to the occupied areas, and he blames me for him being so passionate now. Now, we managed to give the Turks the slip. When I say the Turks the slip, they were expecting us to cross at a certain point, and we crossed somewhere else. But I knew they'd catch up with us. And what we did, we visited Famagusta first. Now, I'm not quite in Cyprus because this is the airport, but we visited Famagusta first, and we took them to the beach. They looked at the horrors of what they could see, the idea that a town, well, a city, what was it, 30,000 inhabitants? 45,000 had been left in that decay. And you will come on to some of the pictures in a minute. We then went on to Gomi Kabi. You will see some pictures in a minute. One of the points of going to Gomi Kabi is because the Greek and Turkish cemeteries are right next to each other. And we took them in there, and you'll see some of the pictures. We showed them around the Greek Cypriot graveyard, and I said to them, just look over the wall. We looked over the wall at a perfectly preserved cemetery. Now, how much money does it cost to preserve a cemetery? And I said to them, look, they can find the money to look after their graveyard, but look how they treat ours. It's not difficult, and this country wants to join the European Union. You could have voted for them to join the European Union, but that left an indelible message on their mind. In fact, last night, those that were in the House of Commons heard Cheryl Murray mention what a mark that had left on her, and that's because of what she saw there. We then went on to Eptagomi, and at this point, the Turkish Secret Services were waiting for us in Eptagomi because they knew that's where they'd find me. We showed them around our churches, we showed them our graveyards. They didn't interfere with us, but we had some TMT come out and stop us from going inside Lukas Church. I took them in our other church, Ayorkis, so they could see, you know, how they're treating our religious temples, whatever you want to call them. Graveyard, took them there. I said to them, well, how do I find my grandparents' grave? I know roughly where they are, but what do? How can we move forward? How can we restore it? We need help there. Last year we asked for permission to have a service in our church. We refused permission. On what grounds? What harm are we doing? They used to use our church as a mosque, but they've built another mosque next door to my wife's house, and then now it's just left. It's turned to rack and ruin. From Eptagomi, I wanted the MPs to understand what it's like to live under Turkish regime, so we had to be careful, but we took them to Rizogakbason. We arranged beforehand with the mayor of Rizogakbason and the teacher to have a reception for them, but we were very clear to them they had to be very, very careful on what they said and how they spoke, and what, you know, whatever they see, just please keep it to yourselves. So they were very respectful of that, because I made it clear that once we leave, they have to still live there. So they made us more than welcome. They had a reception, and for those that have been to Rizogakbason since, there's Andreas Cafe as you drive in. Is it Andreas or is it Nicolas? I think it's Andreas. They made us very welcome. They had a reception. You know, I translated for the MPs. They asked many questions, but they kept it simple. They then took us to the school, where they actually, one of the MPs sat on the piano and played all the Greek, which was quite point. But all the way around, these Secret Service people were following us, and that was the biggest mistake they made, because I don't know how many of you saw it, but 2 days after the trip, there was a debate in the House of Commons, and all of them stood up and spoke of their experiences. In fact, Matthew Offord mentioned that we were followed by their Secret Services and wrote to the Turkish ambassador here complaining, how can British MPs be treated in that manner? So, whilst they didn't attempt to harm us or do anything, this is actually in the school, they did shoot themselves in the foot. Now, one funny point here is actually in the school, unbeknownst to us, they prepared a presentation for the MPs, and some of the children put together like a painting. I think it was a painting, what it cost them, and they presented it to the MPs. So I said to the MPs, well, I said to David, well, have you brought anything? He said, it's okay, I've got a spare House of Commons pen. So I presented them with a House of Commons pen. Then from that, we made our way back. You heard the results of the debate in the House of Commons 2 days later. That was very powerful. And last night as well in the house, we've made friends. So the conclusion is, why did we do it? It's very simple. We all make the mistake of thinking, Maxelda, but the truth is, they don't. We have to teach them. In 74, we had the whole of the house on our site, 600 MPs. But 42 years later, some die, some move on. We get new intake. They don't know. Many of them know Cyprus is just a holiday destination. So when you ask them a question, they don't know. It's up to us to educate them. If we don't educate them, who's going to educate them? We have to do it. So my message is to everyone to contact your local MP, ask them if they know where Cyprus is, and perhaps take them over. In fact, next month we've got the MP for Southampton who's going on holiday there, and I approached her and said, well, I'm going to be there at the same time. I'll take you over. It's about education. Educate. If we all do the same thing, they'll come back, they'll put pressure on their government, and will hopefully then put pressure on Turkey to negotiate or simply to sit back and let us find a solution. Thank you all for listening.
But I personally would never cross. I mean, I'm not a refugee, so I have no reason to cross. But for me, it's all about legitimizing the authorities there. But at the same time, I don't hold it against those who do cross, because I hear daily the passion and the emotions and the memories that they want to try and relive and recapture. I don't support official visits from official representatives. That's just unacceptable, and that's a mistake on the part of our government to allow such recognition to be given to an occupation regime. However, visits such as those that Nick went on with the MPs empower ours, because there's nothing more graphic than actually seeing the damage and the disrespect that Turkey continues to show 40 years on. So to end with, I'm going to lean on you.
Yes.
Okay.
You go from there.
So to end with, we're going to hear a story, an experience from Christopher Tomaso, who unfortunately can't be here, but Aliki has kindly agreed to read it out on his behalf.
Christopher Tomaso is a second-generation Cypriot refugee, and he's writing from a personal point of view. So, many of you will know my mum, Niki Tirimu Tomaso, for her relentless passion. So, needless to say, the day we finally went back to Agios Ambrosios since the invasion was something I shall never forget. We went together around 7 to 10 years ago. The exact time I can't really remember. I'm not going to give a detailed account of this first visit, but I will make many references to it when describing my second visit there recently. In May this year, I went to Agios Ambrosios for the second time. For me, it was a personal pilgrimage to experience the village again and to exchange soil between my mum's grave and her home. And I should say here that sadly, Christopher's mum, Niki, died on the 11th of September 2015 at a very young age of 66. We took the mountain road from Nicosia up to Pentadactylo and stopped at the very top, right in front of the face of the mountain. This is the same mountain that for years I had only seen in the distance when driving from Larnaca to Nicosia. To have it suddenly in front of me was an intense feeling, and I would like to say that for me, Pentadactylo is the backbone of the love and the belonging of everything that lies behind it. As we entered the village, the first stop was the gymnasium school. The first time I went with my mum, I will never forget her reaction at seeing her beloved school. And I won't forget either saying to myself that this school has the most beautiful backdrop I have ever seen. The mountains behind you and the ocean in front. My mum remembered every little detail of the school, and with her great passion, she ran a lap around the running track of the school. Now, in the same place, there is major building work. That made me very sad to see. I wasn't sure, was it an intentional effort by the Turks to change the beauty of what they hoped to be true in our hearts, or just a simple decision to modernize the school. The next stop was my mum's house. I remembered again the first time I went with her and how relatively composed she was. Looking back, I realized that she actually felt very relieved to see her home again. And then, obvious sadness to remember the memories she had left behind, and that the layout of the house had changed structurally, which made translating those memories directly into what she saw in front of her that much harder. I'd gone over in my head so many times how I wanted to approach the situation of speaking to the people living there now, explain to them my mum's recent passing, and that I wanted to exchange soil from her garden with her grave. Finally, I met the Turkish family living there, and with zero understanding of English, I was left on my own to exchange some soil. I was disappointed that I couldn't really explain to them in a non-aggravated way how much my mum loved this house, and I hoped that they would just understand that I would convey this without actually saying anything. What was apparent was a sense of distance the family kept with me, and I believe this is because deep down they know that the foundation of the house is not theirs, and they are perhaps unsettled in themselves. The next stop was the cemetery. The state of the graves was a sad sight, but I was determined to find the graves of my grandfather, my auntie, and my uncle. I managed to find my aunt and my uncle's graves, but not my grandfather's. It made me think how I would feel if suddenly I was unable to visit my mum's grave. I think that would be the hardest part of not being able to return home, and made me realize how painful it must have been for my mum to have the most special things in her life just torn away from her. Her home, and not being able to visit her family, who had all been laid to rest. Finally, we went to the church. As we all know, the church is the epicenter of every village, and I tried to picture it all those years ago, prior to 1974, during the Easter celebrations, with children playing games outside and people mingling together with one another. With a bit of good luck, we were taken inside the church, and behind the partitioned wall, we were shown the original wooden frames that held all the holy icons. And there was also the Agia Drabeta. It was like a piece of history with countless stories trapped behind this wall, and I felt very privileged to be able to see it. It was weird, really, because it's odd that I felt privileged to see something that actually belonged to us anyway. Throughout the day, we had various exchanges with Turkish Cypriots in the village with whom my cousin knew from his many visits there. They were all from villages around Bafos, and they told us the same thing. We want you to return home to your village, and we want to return to ours. It seems that the sense of community, foundation, and tradition are equally shared with these Turkish Cypriots, which somewhat gave me hope. I will return again soon to the village and absorb as much of it as I can. As the first generation of refugees become fewer and fewer, I believe it is even more important now for the second and third generations to learn and experience as much about their villages as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Aligi, for kindly agreeing to do that. And I think that account just sums up what we've heard throughout the night, which is the bittersweet experience of returning as visitors. And that's why we will continue to campaign until we can return permanently without restrictions to what is ours. With that, Theo has asked me to just give a brief update on a campaign that we are currently running, which is the right of all of us in the diaspora to vote in a referendum which will seek a settlement to end the Turkish occupation of the Republic of Cyprus. And the reason why we need this campaign is that what we learned from the referendum on the Annan Plan was that refugees and others eligible for citizenship of the Republic of Cyprus but who are residing outside of Cyprus are excluded by law because it requires you to reside for 6 months within Cyprus. And as we're seeing global trends across the world, which are in effect removing the residency requirement for elections, and that you'll see soon in the UK, we are seeking the right, and we should emphasize we're only seeking the right to vote in a referendum, not in general elections. And the reason why is something that we've stated time and time again.
Specifying, based on the Constitution, how anyone would have the right to vote in the diaspora. And the main clause is the 6-month rule, as I call it. You have to be resident for 6 continuous months in Cyprus prior to any referendum or any vote for presidential elections and so forth, to then have the right to be a resident of Cyprus and so forth. Now, we can take legal action against the government. So maybe we should get a team of lawyers and a barrister. There's no reason. I'm just.
Again, there might be similar situations with refugees in the other countries. The UN and the UN auspices they conducted and allowed refugees to vote. That's happened before in other countries.
Exactly. Well, let me just ask one question, or let me ask you all here who are refugees. I'd like you to put your hands up if you think that you should have the right to vote in the future, for the future of the country in a referendum. I'm not interested in who's going to become president or a member of parliament, but in the next referendum, the solution to the settlement in the next referendum. Put your hands up if you believe you should have the right to vote. There we are, the majority. Now, why doesn't, well, let me just say, we have the Consular General of the Cyprus High Commission here. Would you be kind enough, please, to convey to the President of the Republic of Cyprus that tonight we had a majority vote by refugees in the diaspora that we demand, as refugees, the right to vote in the next referendum. Yeah. Now, and we'd like the President to invite a delegation from the diaspora, represented by the Federation, associations and so forth, to meet with him and other members of the Ministry of Interior, please.
There is no need to change the law of Cyprus. This can simply be done by an ad hoc law, a special law, which only applies to the referendum itself. So it's even easier than overhauling the entire law. Yeah, but
At the House of Parliament, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have met with the political leaders, both from Vysi. We've met with Diko, Edek, and which other party? Agel. I actually met Mr. Gibriano in person. Everybody agrees that the refugees do have rights. But when you ask them, well, why don't you then pursue these rights through the House of Parliament for a 2/3 majority vote? Because some of you MPs are refugees as well. So why should you have the right to vote and we don't have the right to vote? Why don't you come to England and live in my house and let me go back to Cyprus and live in your house in the free areas? Why? Why not? Why don't you ask the President? Where's Angelos Beshonges? He's not here. He said, I'll give my President of Cyprus my 50 skales στον Άιον Αυρόσιον, if he gives me his house in Nicosia, right? Let him become a refugee, and then let him see if he will not have the right to vote. Now, these are the feelings of the refugees. These are the feelings, your feelings, and our rights. And we're quoting law, we're quoting politicians who have other agendas. And this is the big problem. Politicians have agendas. And the agendas we don't fit in as refugees in the diaspora within the agenda back home in Cyprus. That's not good enough. When all the political parties come to the United Kingdom, come to the community, we're always there to support them, aren't we, Sava? Costa, aren't we? We're there to support them, to help them, to push forward a solution for our country. But when it comes to the nuts and bolts of us having the rights as well, we're not given them. We become second-class citizens? I don't think that's right. I think we have to wake up. And they have to wake up in Cyprus and know that we Our blood is the same blood as theirs. And we should have the right to vote. I rest, I won't continue. I think I just come back to the point that this is Kyriakos Christodoulou memorial event, and one of the promises we gave to Kyriakos, who's from Ios Ambrosios, is that we will never, as Lobby for Cyprus, stop fighting for the 3 R's. The return of the refugees, the repatriation of the colonists, and the removal of the Turkish troops in Cyprus. And we will fight until the end. Whether it's in my generation or in 400 years on, we want a united Republic of Cyprus with freedom of movement, freedom of establishment, with no barriers. We don't want a segregated country by the bizonal, bicommunal federal solution. We want a united European country. Nico.
Σε γνωρίζω από την κόψη του σπαθιού την τρομερή. Σε γνωρίζω από την όψη που με διαμετράει τη γη. Απ' τα κόκαλα βγαλμένη των Ελλήνων τα γερά και σαν πρώτα ανδριωμένη χέρι ο χέρι